Hey guys, and welcome to this long overdue video on the new Photon Bolt. For those of you that are new here, this is actually a remake of a video I made, almost like 2 years ago now. It's kind of crazy to think about. But this video should work with all of my other videos on Photon Bolt. Of course, if they don't, just let me know and I'll try to remake them. But without further ado, let's get it started. Alright, so what are the very basics we need in a multiplayer game? Well, first we need a menu scene that has buttons like host game and join game, and then we need a game scene to connect to. So first, let's start off by tackling the menu scene, and then we'll jump into the game. Okay, so first off, let's make the buttons. So let's go to the hierarchy, UI, and then button. We don't have to use TextMesh Pro for this example, but I generally do recommend it. And let's have this be the host game button. So I'll just name this host game button like that, and then we can change the text to host, and we'll copy and paste this and rename it join game button, and change this text to join, and then to look good we'll move maybe the join game button down by 50 and the host game button up by 50. Next, we're going to give these buttons some functionality. So let's go onto the canvas object and add a component called menu. Create an add and then wait for that to load. Once that's there, you can go ahead and open it on up. And I am a neat freak, so I always like to purge my scripts of all this stuff. And finally, we are ready to start coding. Okay, so we're actually going to need a lot of these using tags. Instead of adding them as I go along, I'm just going to go ahead and add them all right now. So the first we need is Unity Engine, then we're going to need using system. We're also going to need using Bolt. We're also going to need using bolt.matchmaking. And lastly, we're going to need using UDP kit like that. Okay, so with our two buttons in mind, we have a host game and a join game. So let's make some functions that those buttons can use. So I'm going to make a public void start server, and this will be called from the host game button. And then similarly, we're going to need a join game, something for that to use. So I'm going to name this start client. Server and client are Bolt terminology, so get used to those. And then for this comment, I'm just going to say called from join button, like that. So starting for the server, it's actually relatively straightforward, at least for now. Let's just go ahead and say Bolt launcher dot start server. That's actually all we need to call within this for now. And so Bolt will go ahead and do all the stuff it needs to. Once it's done, right now, we're just going to have it launch the game scene. And to do that, we're actually going to need to use a built-in Bolt function. In this case, instead of deriving from mono behavior, we're going to derive from global event listener. I'll go into this more in future videos. For now, just know that you need to do it, and it gives us access to Bolt functions. The Bolt function we're going to need to use in this case is public override void, and then once you type in override void, this override is very important. You need to do this every time you use a Bolt function. You'll get a list of all the pre-made ones. If you don't have this list, you probably aren't deriving from something that uses Bolt. But in this case, public override void Bolt start done. This is what tells us when Bolt is finished starting up. So what we need to do in here now is create a session. And with regards to this, I'm actually not entirely sure what this does, and me being the neat freak that I am, I generally like to remove it. I'm not actually sure if that's good or not. I haven't noticed a difference in my games. If you do know Bolt well, could you leave a comment kind of telling us if that's good or bad or what exactly that does? But moving on, we're going to want to say Bolt matchmaking dot create session. And then we're going to want two things in here. Looks complicated, but the first we need is a session ID. We can just name this test or whatever. In the future, you might want to name your sessions different things if you have many of them. That is far in the future, so this is fine for now. Just remember to come back here to change the session ID names. And then we're also going to want a scene to load. And we don't have one yet, but I plan on naming it game. So let's name it game. Again, you can name the scene whatever you want. Just remember that it matches up here. And with that, that is actually all we need to do for the server. Hooray! So we could continue right now and do all this client coding, but I kind of like gradual feedback. It's kind of fun to see things work. So let's just go test this to see if it works. So let's start off by going back to Unity and connecting the functionality that we just made for our host button. So let us go to, whoops, we want the host button and then add an on click in the button. And let's drag in canvas because that's where our script is, navigate to menu, and then we want to say, it's not there because we forgot to save. Don't forget to save, guys. And now that I just went and saved, it should be there, and it also has a bunch of bolt things. The one we used is start server and start client. We want this one as we are using the host button right now. Okay, so next let's make the scene that the bolt server is going to load. If you see here, I named mine game. Depending on whatever you made yours, just go ahead and right click, create scene, and name it whatever you so desire. After you do that, let's open it up and it will just be blank for now. So for this very basic game, I'm just going to have a ground and we'll kind of have an eagle eye view of a couple players or cubes as they kind of just move across the ground. Very basic for now, but let's start off with a ground, and that is just going to be a cube. Let's rename that to ground. And just so we can tell the difference between the players and the ground, let's first reset the transform, put it to -1, and then maybe make this like 20 by 20. Probably doesn't need to be that big, but it's probably fine. And then let's go create a material. We can name this ground map. Drag this bad boy onto the ground as so. And then we can change the color to maybe some sort of bluish, something like that. So you get the idea that it's not a player, but it is indeed ground. One more quick thing while we're with the environment, let's change this to 10, -10 like it is, and 50. Okay, so now let's make a prefab that the players will use when they spawn in. For this tutorial, we're just going to use a cube as a player and reset that. And then one thing that is key with Photon Bolt is the notion of entities. An entity is something here that sends data from one computer to another. I believe that's the correct definition. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. But let's go to add a component and type in bolt entity. It'll pop up right there. So a lot of these things are advanced and you can leave them as they are for now, but you will get an error. It says you must assign a state to this prefab before using it. So what the heck is a state? As you see, we have not assigned. Well, let's go into the bolt asset menu at the very top. I'm not sure if you can see this, but I'm clicking on bolt from the list of options and then assets. This is the bolt asset menu. I cleared mine. You may very well have a lot here. If you want to remove them for Mac, you press the control button and then an X will pop up. But basically there's states, objects, commands, and events. We can go into those more later. But for now, this is asking us for a state. So let us right click and click state. In my previous videos, which will chronologically play after this one, I used the state name custom cube state. So I'm going to start with that name to make it easier for you guys. And with that, we can compile. So what the heck is compiling? Well, basically, every time you edit something in the asset menu, the functions Bolt uses look in this asset menu. Basically, every time you edit something in this asset menu, just hit the compile button. It's this green arrow right here. You can click that, or you can go into the Bolt tab again on top, and there's a compile assembly button. So every time you edit something in the assets menu, remember to compile assembly or you'll probably get weird errors. So you'll know it finishes if you go into the debug menu and hopefully it says success right here. Even after it says that, you might need to wait a few moments for Unity to just kind of register everything. But once that's done, now we should have our cube state right here. So now with our player made, let's make it a prefab really quick, and then we can remove it from the scene. And we need to instantiate it, and we need to instantiate it using Bolt. So let's create an empty object. I'm gonna reset it again. You can name this whatever. I'm just gonna name it manager. Pretty generic, but it works. And then add a component named network callbacks. Network callbacks. I don't know why it's auto filling in, but for you, it'll probably just say new script. We just want a new script, network callbacks, just like that, create and add. This will be a pretty simple script, so let's open it up. Clear all this stuff. And we are going to want to derive from global event listener like we did in the menu. And to do that, we are going to need to be using Bolt. Goodness, if I can spell it right. And then instead of mono behavior, global event listener, just like that. Perfect. So all we're going to want to do in this game is instantiate a player when they load into the game. So first, let's use a pre-made Bolt function. To do that, we're going to need public override void. And in this case, we're going to want to use scene load local done. So what do we want to happen when the scene loads? Well, we want to instantiate something. Instantiate. What do we want to instantiate? Well, we want to instantiate the prefab we just made. So let's get a reference to it. Public game object cube prefab. We'll connect that later. So let's instantiate the cube prefab. Where do we want to instantiate this? Well, let's make a random spawn position, and set that equal to a new vector 3. And we'll say random dot range. In the Bolt tutorial, they use -8 to 8. That generally works pretty well for this example, so we're just going to keep the same thing they did, 0, and another random.range on the z-axis saying random.range, again, -8 to 8. That's our spawn position, so let's instantiate our cube prefab at that spawn position. And lastly, we just say quaternion.identity, like that. And again, very importantly, since we are using Bolt, we want to do this over the network. So we just tab on a Bolt network.instantiate. And now it should instantiate for all players. Hooray. So now with this done, let's go test to make sure this works. So save, wait for Unity to compile, and then remember to attach the cube prefab to the place we need it. One more thing we need to do before we hit that play button is add the scene to the build settings menu. So let's go to File, Build Settings, and just drag and drop. And of course, whenever you're working with something like this with Bolt, it's always good to compile the assembly just to make sure Bolt finds it. Okay, when that says success, now we can hit the play button, go to host, and hopefully you'll see stuff working. It's exciting. And then you'll know it worked if it loaded the scene. And there we go. There is our one host cube. Hooray! Don't get too excited quite yet because we still need the join button to work for the client. So to do that, let's head back into our menu scene. And now, in this function that's called from the button in the menu, instead of saying bolt launcher.start server, we're going to say bolt launcher.start client. Very important difference. In game, you can use if statements that determine if the player is the server or the client, and generally you just want to be able to differentiate between who's a host and who's not. So this is how you do that. Okay, this next part is going to seem a little bit complicated, and I admit it kind of is, so I'll leave a link to the written tutorial in the description of this video, but for now, just follow along and I promise it will work. It should work. So let's make public override void, again, another pre-made bolt function, and we're going to want this time session list updated. I just press tab to make that auto fill in. And now, basically, we're going to loop through all the open sessions and just join the first one that we find. So we're going to say for each, double tab, var session in session list, like that. We want the UDP session, and we can name that Photon session equal to session dot value as UDP session. And guys, please, I am not making this up. I'm getting this straight from the written tutorial. If Photon session dot source equals UDP session source dot Photon, bear with me, bolt matchmaking dot join session Photon session. You also saw a join random session right here, which could be good for random server making. But for now, again, this will, every few seconds, it'll look through all open Photon sessions, and it'll connect to the first one. That's fine for now. We'll look over how to change it later. And again, this is probably the most complicated thing we'll do, so if you did it, congratulations, and let us finally go test and see if this works. So now, let us save. Head back into Unity. And the very last thing we should need to do at this point is just connect that functionality to the Join Game button. So again, click the button, go to OnClick, drag and drop in the canvas, and now select Start Client. And we are ready. So now, the moment you've all been waiting for. Let's go to File, Build and Run. Wait for that to load. And when that boots up, we can leave this on joining right now. So this will be the client. Click yes. You'll know that it's working because the bolt stuff will pop up. And so right now, it'll just keep looking for a game to join. And let's have the game to join. I'm going to have it be the editor right here. So we'll click play, and it looks kind of ugly right now. We can fix that with a canvas scaler later, but basically let's host from here, see everything working on the editor. It should load in. Beautiful. And now that we're loaded in, our client will find a server, and hooray! It should eventually, you should see 2 cubes for our 2 players. Hooray! One final tip I'll leave you guys with is if you don't like the debug info taking up like half the screen as well as the console, you can turn it off by going to the Bolt Settings menu, Bolt Settings, scroll down to the bottom, and then under here in Miscellaneous, you can turn off Show Debug Info, and then also Log Targets, you can just set that to nothing. That way, when you start a game, you can see what's happening, and you'll still have your console to yourself. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. If you intend to follow in the series, the next video you're going to watch, I'm going to look quite a bit younger, so be ready for that. And I also just wanted to say thank you so much for all the support you guys leave me. I read all the comments, and the like ratio on my videos is just crazy. I honestly never expected it to go to where it did. I have like 50,000 views right now, which is just awesome. And really just thank you guys, and yeah, we'll see what the future has in store for us. So thank you, and see you next time.